In this video, I'm going to interview Sketchy, the leader of Singularity, and his much larger sphere whose name I have forgotten. Unfortunately, due to circumstances which I could not control in the slightest, some of this video was corrupted, and other parts were kind of split up. You're going to have to guess at when that is, because when I was trying to process this video, my computer had some trouble, and, well, I can't do any of the fancy stuff I would normally do. So you're going to have like 2 images in this one, you're going to hear us talk. I have fun with that, you know? I hope you enjoy it. It should be very interesting. I think it's one of the most interesting interviews that I've done.
I'm Sketchy, leader of Singularity. Really all that needs to be said, I think.
A very short list.
I mean, there's a lot of other stuff on the list, but I like to stick to the things that are relevant now, I guess.
Okay, true. So, yeah, this will be more covering modern day events in contrast to some of my other interviews recently with figures of historical controversy.
Yes.
So let's take a look at the treaty web and discuss things a bit, because the game is very different now from a few years ago.
Yes, even a year ago, I'd say.
So we've transitioned, I think, from many spheres to multipolarity to something like a tangled web now. What do you think?
I think it's still multipolarity. It's just more confusing. I still think you have groups. It's just the groups have more overlap because there are more alliances that are hanging between them, I guess. And there are a lot of attempts to poach group people away from groups. It's not so different from bipolarity. If you remember the web when we were bipolar, there was a bunch of treaties across. Like it wasn't just a clean line down the middle. People would tie treaties to each other to try and poach away, or so they could get out of certain fights, etc. The same thing here, I think. It's just multipolar.
I think it's slightly different than that, though, because at least when it was bipolar, there were like clusters of power, IQ, TKR, Rose sphere, etc. They were more cleanly defined, I think. With this, I mean, people aren't making sphere maps anymore, which they used to have a lot of fun making, because people would like corner off like Rose sphere and like EVH sphere and Eclipse sphere. I don't think I could make one at this point. It seems
I think that's because it's not as clear to the average person looking at the map what the spheres are, but to the people who are actually in the spheres, they know. So you could definitely, like, right now, I'd say the groups are that you have TKR House, that's one group. You have Syndicate sort of floating around. You have Rose as a group. You have EVHKT as a group, and then you have Sing Eclipse as a group.
I see.
That's pretty much all of the groups. And then you have a bunch of these smaller, like Penta, which is tied to Rose, and I would say it's part of Rose. You have this big thing DB's doing, which I'm not fully aware what that is, but that's, I guess, attached to us. So you could say that's Clock, I guess, by extension. TGH is their little like micro beer thing, but I would say that's still peripherally tied to Rose. But like the actual groupings, I would say it's Rose, TKR, TS, EVH, us, and Eclipse, and that's where it is at the moment.
I see. That's tricky. It seems like Eclipse is kind of tied to everyone right now. Like, I didn't get a mention there. But even they've now sort of joined the grouping.
Well, TI isn't part of the main block, I suppose. The main block, since I noticed there's been some confusion about that, which is weird because it was in the original post, but the main block is Eclipse, Sting, DB, Weabonism. TI is tied to Eclipse, and I guess also they have an OD with DB, but that predated it. As I understand it, Eclipse is, trying to, I guess, try new things with them. But yeah, I wouldn't say they're like core part of the sphere right now.
Would you consider Pentaforce or its remnants as like part of Rose Sphere then?
Yeah. Well, okay. I should clarify. They are part of the sphere in the sense that, like, they're peripherally tied to us. Like, they're not part of the block. Let me correct
Yeah.
myself there. They're not part of the block. The core block is the 4 alliances I listed. Yeah, I mean, I think Penta has the 2 biggest alliances in Penta are both signed to Rose. So yeah, I mean, I would say Penta is with Rose. Yeah.
Okay. That actually does clarify a lot of it. I was kind of confused by things for a while, to be honest. So
Yeah, I mean, I have a tiering chart and with all the spheres, and it's not been any harder for me to assign people to that than it was before. It's just messier. It looks messy because there's more people trying to reach out across spheres to make groupings and things. It may get messier soon though. I could see some shifts happening that makes that more confusing, but for now, it's not as complicated as it looks. Anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
I was expecting, because to me it looked like a giant pool of chaos, and I was expecting after the global for it to be somewhat organized, as like TS and TKI tried to like pull more people. But that hasn't really happened. It seems like
Yeah, there's been a meta shift in the past, I want to say, year and a half towards this. That's kind of, I think, started with Sale. Because Sale had their core block, but then they had all these other, like, external ties that they had all over across the place. You know, the obvious ones like CTO, which weren't part of Sale, quotation marks. But then there were like tried the World Task Force, which then also connected to CLM. There's a bunch of these other little like connections all over the place, and I think that's where it started. And since then, that was an isolated sphere. We tried it a little bit with CIS, and yeah, it's now even TKR through TSC and a couple of other alliances that have joined the web. So it could go. It could, like, I think whether or not this stays the permanent state of affairs is hard to say. I think we'll eventually see a return to mod blocks probably in a year and a half or so, probably. But who knows
wait,
for sure?
we're back into
I could see it
multipolarity
happening.
or close to like bipolarity.
I don't think we're going to go to bipolarity. I think there was a time very early on when I first came back to the game where it was going to go bipolar, and then Florida was made and Fortuna happened, and I think that threw everything off track. And I can't see us going to bipolarity. No, I think there's too many grudges and too much pragmatism. People are too willing to shift to a different grouping more often for that to, like, in order for bipolarity to happen, it has to sort of solidify, which means there has to be a lot of enmity between the groups. I can see a bipolar war happening, but I can't see a bipolar like a bipolar like long term coalitions happening at the moment. I don't see that. Exactly. So that's a big deal. But obviously, if you're just a regular guy, like a regular player, and you're not like an econ head or an econ person, you're not going to like be thrilled by those changes, even though I think they'll have a drastic impact on the game in the long term. I get his point, but I also think that he needs to understand that there is limitations in the team. And whenever we make it, like, I've made suggestions, I always have to keep in the back of my head that, like, this is like whenever me and Triple just sit in a chat talking about like what design things we would like to see in the game, and that spirals very quickly. You get scope creep when you're thinking about these ideas, and then the dev team just can't do it. So it's like you have to scale these things back, and you have to try and target the areas in the game that you think are impacting the game the worst. And for me personally, I think the biggest issue right now is retention. And I think the biggest culprit for the game's hurt retention is the raid meta. And this gets people very in arms, especially these days, because most people were raised on the raid meta. But that's kind of selection bias in the sense that all of the people who made it through those first months of this game raided. So they all think it's fine. No one ever talks about the people who didn't make it because it wasn't an engaging experience. And I think that plays a lot into the brain drain of the game right now. There's a lack of talent, especially in internals, I've noticed. This has always been true, but it's more true now than I think it's ever been. Where you have a lot of people who are good at MA, and not many people who are good at econ, not many people who are good at IA, and even people who aren't very good at FA. And I think that's largely due to the fact that a lot of the people who would have been good in those fields get filtered out of the game by the raid meta being how it is. And I don't think people necessarily care a lot of the time because it's beneficial. It's great for alliances that are older. Like, it's changed the whole economic meta, flipped it on its head, like, where you can buy upper tier cities now dedicatedly, while before you had to invest in a lower tier. Or go elite, I guess, and that had its own disadvantages. So where the game will go mechanically, I couldn't say. Where I hope it goes is I hope we find a way to resolve the retention problems and make raid meta more optional. I don't think it needs to be eliminated, but there needs to be better alternatives to the
I
raid
agree.
meta.
I do agree, but I'd like to add something to that or push back on it. So I think
Yeah.
the raid meta is flawed. It's super repetitive. You're raiding inactive, so it's not very fun. There are better ways to engage new players than that. However, I think another big problem is actually engaging older players, because like the reason people like the raid meta isn't because they love raiding. It's because after they stop raiding, you're stagnant. There's nothing happening.
Yeah.
So even if there was like I've given Torn a lot of credit because Torn like has many flaws, but there are like quite a few different things you can do, even if it's just like leveling up stats. So like if a whale had to log into this game and like press a button to gain some of the bonuses or like pay his bills like they did in Cyber Nations, I think that would actually be pretty good incentive for people to like engage with the game.
I think you're right, but I think where I would counter that is that the thing about whales is they've already lasted a long time in the game without quitting. What's happened is because we have this raid meta, there's like a false expectation. There's already false expectations because this game is marketed as a nation simulator, but this is not really a nation simulator at all. There's nothing of it.
No.
It's a clan fighting game. Essentially, it's a team sport, not a nation simulator. There's the simulation of your nation is so basic and so like redundant. Most of the like stats are cosmetic, like approval, tax rates, etc. None of that matters. So that's the first hurdle you'll run into is because it's marketed as a nation simulator. You get people who apply expecting it to be a nation simulator, and then they play the game, they realize it's not, and then they quit. Then you have a bunch of people who go through the rating filter, and a bunch of people drop off because they don't like rating because they want a more PvE or selectively PvE experience. They don't want to be constantly having to like fight people. You'll see this in a lot of other games. It's just a psychological thing, I think, to a lot of people where like, they don't want to be aggressive or whatever. It's not good for casual players, which you do need casual players in this game. And I say that as someone who, has derided people who are casual. I also know that they are part of the game, and you kind of need them to flesh out the game community and make the game bigger. But then the issue is once you hit the end of the raid meta, then what? You stop raiding, and suddenly you go from everyday raiding farming. And so what then you end up getting is one of three things happen, or one of four things happens really. So they either go to like a raiding alliance. That's one. Two is they just stay raiding, and that's how like enterprise and other things come about. Is from like a long term raiding. They quit the game, or they just fucking deal with it and stay. And that's only a portion of those people. And then some of those people will go and join Gov as a substitute. But even as much, like, my advice to people was always, once you're done raiding, try and get involved in Gov. But even then, those are two very different experiences, and not necessarily going to attract the same people. So you're right about that, but I don't think that the retention of whales is as important as the retention of new players, because I think whales exist because they stayed over time already. But yeah, I mean, I agree that we need more mechanics to engage older players as well. I just don't think it's as big of a priority as
That's true.
keeping new players in, because we need more talent in the game in general. We need more engagement, and that's going to come from more people generally.
I have a contentious question, actually, a follow up. So, what do you think of these super alliances and their contribution to that? Because, like, if you consolidate most of the alliances into like a handful, a lot of talent
Yeah.
is going to be wasted.
Okay, well, I will say this. I actually don't think there's as much talent in the majors as maybe you think. I'll be honest. I say that personally, despite, I think, having a pretty stacked roster, but I don't think that's true of all the majors. I think some of them have skeleton crews operating these things. You'll find in a lot of alliances, there's that one guy who's the guy, and he does a lot, and he's the workhorse. And I think you can pick the, like, I don't want to name those people because I don't know for certain. I have an idea of who they are in each of these alliances. I'm pretty sure Rose has one. I'm pretty sure EVH has one. I don't know as much. I think TKR is a little bit more team based, but TKR also has issues in all those areas, so that might tell you something. Eclipse has one as well. TFB has one. We have two, and then we have a lot of other experts. So I mean, from a talent perspective, I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. We have a lot of good people, but I don't know that necessarily there is a consolidation of talent. Really,
I think you're right.
it's just a lack. I think it's a lack of talent. I don't think there's much consolidation of talent. I think it's a lack of talent, and there's a lack of ambition as well. There are probably people who could do these jobs and could be good, who just don't. They're just happy to be relegated to whatever, like, position they're in, and that's their fault, their problem. Like, this is something I say to people who, like, there's a lot of yappers who like to yap about the game state from the sidelines. You look at them and you look at their line, like their nation, and they're not even in Gulf. Or they're like a staff or low Gulf, or they're high Gulf, and they have the power to do something, but they're not really doing anything. And it's like, you got to step out of your comfort zone and do these things if you want them to happen. You can't just complain all the time. There are people in the background making decisions and making moves and wanting to do things, and having trouble finding people who will do those things with them. And so that's part of the problem. But that's a whole, like, we can talk about that later probably. Like, the whole game is dying, naps, blah blah blah, all the other stuff. That's probably a whole other subject we can get into.
Maybe.
I don't want to go too far down that on this particular thread.
Fair
but
enough.
yeah, I think retention wise, we need to improve retention. There are a lot of different updates that could be done. Because the counterpoint to your arc of the top alliances consolidating is the bottom alliances aren't doing their job either. Like, there are a lot of alliances in the, 15 to 30-ish range who aren't growing, who aren't engaging new players, who aren't, teaching them what they need to be doing. There are a lot of undead alliances that really, the issue is, in the past, I would say you should merge. But the issue is now so much consolidation has happened in the top 8 alliances that, like, it's kind of like, should you merge? And it's like, okay, so the counter to that would be they merge with another alliance of their size. But the problem is, both of those alliances are basically dead, then they merge together and they're just a bigger dead alliance.
Yeah, I put that in. I don't remember which guide I put it in, but effectively for some smaller alliances, it's not worth doing mergers because you're inheriting such a huge mass of smaller nations, and
Yes.
the time and energy it will and investment it will take to make them useful is not possible for them. It's a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, mergers only work if at least one alliance in the merger is good, and not just good, but very good. They have to be very good, because when you're in, like, if let's say, let me pick a random alliance. Who's someone who's not very good that I can roast without getting into too much trouble?
I would say Antarctica Alliance, maybe.
Antarctica Alliance is kind of an outlier in the sense that they're like a no Discord alliance. I suppose I would merge Antarctica Alliance, but it would be a big cleanup job probably, because I think it's not a real alliance. But let's use the Antarctica Alliance, right? That's 130 members that you would have to bring in. You'd have to sort out like where they're at. For a lot of them, it would require like re-education. That sounds dystopian, but
Yeah.
like you don't know how they've been taught to play the game. So in a lot of cases, you may have to teach them. There are like community aspects where they're all connected to each other potentially, but then the problem with that is if a member's shit, like really bad, they got to get the cut. Unless you want to build like one of these big bloated community alliances like TI, but the problem with those is then they just get rolled enough times and then the community dies, is what happens. So you have to have a minimum standard, I think, even in a more community focused alliance, to avoid just collapsing in on yourself, I think.
To some extent, yeah. I think culture also plays a huge role in it. I think we have a very
Well,
open
yeah.
door policy, but because
Well, yeah,
everything's
so do
so
we.
centralized, yeah, because everything's so centralized and the alliance takes priority, I guess it's a different mentality from something like TI or Antarctica where they can build whatever they want, they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, well, individualism and central control have pros and cons. Like, I think a lot of people think that like that 100 is like the way to play. I think 100 is the best way to play competitively, but I don't think it's necessarily the best way to play in general. It depends on your priorities and what you're trying to do and where you are. Like if I was in Rose's position, I wouldn't have 100 because I wouldn't need it because I'm already ahead,
Yeah.
right? But Singularity is multiple years behind the curve, and we're catching up very fast. And a large part of that is to do with redistribution and economic priority. We're a meritocratic alliance. The better you do, the more money you make from us. We funnel money towards good players, and that creates a system where our best players are the people that are our biggest players, generally speaking. So it works for us, but it depending on your situation, your strategy is going to be different. But
That's true.
yeah, there are pros and cons to these things. Like for us, because we have a high tax rate, because we have a high tax rate, it's a lot harder to poach people. People have a stigma against high taxes, and this is especially true of the types of people who get poached. Because the people who tend to get poached, usually they're individualist types. They're people who want to leave their alliance to try something new, quote unquote, etc. And so, like those types of people are harder to get in 100 because they're taught by a lot of the majors, a lot of people, that taxes are bad, and a large part of that is due to how some high tax alliances have handled growth before. So you don't know. You're kind of at the whims of the alliance, and so I get why people don't like it. And if you're like a shit player, if you're a shit player, you're not going to join Sing because you're not going to get shit. Like you're going to get 100, and you're not going to. We're not going to invest. We'll build cities for you, but it's going to be at a much slower rate than if you're on 0-0 building them for yourself, right? But if you're a good player, then you're incentivized to join because you'll get focus. That's how our mindset is. But thing is, people who tend to get poached don't think that way. They think 100 bad. I want to spend my own money. I want to play the game. That's a common one you hear. But the thing about playing the games, this game is not that. Like fighting is the game, in my opinion. Econ is not the game. Econ is the game if you're an econ head or an econ gov person, I think. Then it's more interesting. But if you're just building your own nation, that gets bold really
even
fast.
War though, I would argue War is barely a game. Like there is some like nuance to it, but most of the time I think people join the game for the stories. And the War's very poor storytelling devices.
Yes and no. I don't know. I mean, I think you're right and wrong at the same time. I think there are different types of people who have different priorities and things they like. But I think the stories lately are too hidden away from the public to be something that can be enjoyed. And I think a lot of people, especially because of the raid meta, people's brains are wired towards the war. And I do think a lot of people enjoy the war. I mean, our guys, like our top guys, are all fucking like bloodthirsty maniacs. If they could decide policy, we would be fighting every 2 months. Like, which is not good in the long term. You do need to grow, or you just eventually lose all the time. But that's their sort of mindset, and there are people like that all throughout the game, I think. So I don't know. I think people need to find again. It's also a thing with alliances. My view of alliances is that you should go the alliance that fits best to the type of game you want to play. So I don't mind people saying we don't want to join Sing because I want to grow my own nation. Fair enough. I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, but that's I get it. Like it would be better for you to just join Econ at that point. But I understand the mindset, and in that case, it's like, well, there's a whole host of other alliances for you to choose from. I think a lot of alliances try to catch as many people as they can by having this sort of like loose definition of what their alliance is, and I don't know that that necessarily helps them. We have a very set identity that we have, and we're attracting a very set type of player. And it works very well for us. It gives us a lot of economic freedom to do a lot of crazy shit that a lot of our alliances just don't have the capacity to do because they're on low taxes. And as long as you have that identity and you know what your sell is, you can sell it to people and people will join. And we get heaps of recruits. I think we get the most over time. We've gotten the most. But we also have a huge turnover because the game's retention is shit.
Yeah.
And we're also because we take in like we have a very low barrier to entry. A lot of alliances stop people at the door. We don't really stop people at the door. We let them in, and then we see them, and we evaluate them over time, and we phase them out over time, depending on whether or not they fit with us. And it works over time. The best people rise to the top naturally, and the worst ones don't. And it works for us. I
Yeah,
forget
we replaced interviews with onboarding a couple of years ago, and it's quite effective, I think. Because you can usually figure out who's stupid pretty fast if they can follow a few basic orders.
Yeah, we still do interviews, but I mean, we're not real. Like we're only really doing them to determine if the person can literally read.
Yeah.
It's just like, can they follow a basic instruction? Can they read? And are they like a raging asshole or like some sort of like, I don't know, neo-Nazi or fucking Antifa type? I don't, crazy person. Um, that's all we're really doing. It's a very basic screening, and then from there we go on and we work people out over time. And the thing is that works because of the raid meta. If we had to individually grow these people, this probably wouldn't work as a system. And we don't leave people to raid very much. We've kind of gone back and forth. We used to raid a lot, and then we slimmed it down to almost nothing. Now we're sort of in between a little bit, where we still make people raid, but we like to get people into the game faster. I don't like leaving people at C5 to raid indefinitely. Like I want them, in fighting range within ideally a year, especially if they're good. If someone's really good, we have our new econ head, Goose. He's been with us. How long has it been now? Not very long. Like he's a very new player, and by the end of this period, he's going to be C40. right? And it's because he's really good. He gave us 2 great war performances. He's working his ass off in econ, doing econ with me. He's great. And it's like, a player like that shouldn't have to wait 3 years to get to play the game. You know what I mean? If they're
Yeah.
good, they should get in and they should be able to play in a year. And we can do that because we have this sort of tax system that allows us to do that.
Computer says it's fine. It worked. Cool. So I'm just going to record the rest of it and we won't stream the rest of it. And then I'll mix it into a video later. That's such a weird bug. Anyway. So as I was saying before, I like to sort of conceptualize how Camelot sort of developed on the 100% tax side, not as, I guess, an evolution, but more as like pragmatism. And I think a lot of newer alliances do need to see it that way. Because, yeah, as a bigger alliance, you can have lower taxes and you can get all the benefits from that. And there are benefits, especially internal ones. But yeah, as a smaller alliance, you need to be more competitive and you need to be able to deal with the various threats of the lower tier. That being like, one, not being competitive economically means you're not going to get as many members. Dealing with raiders and proxies. The nuke rogues is a wild one. So I drafted a script for a different video about how the big alliances compete. And I think it's one of the only videos I will not be able to publish because I think it doesn't teach a very nice version of the game. It's not something I want to encourage. But the nuke rogues are a serious problem because if you are facing a low tax alliance, like if I'm competing against TI, I can just hire a raider or task a member with nuking their city 40 or whatever every single day for the next year. And unless they have some policy or program, something that'll protect him and rebuild his cities, he will just leave. Right? Like the cost is too high. So it's for smaller alliances, I think they are pushed to 100% taxes. And I know I was elected, sort of elected, into Camelot on the basis that I would lower our taxes from 60% to 0% because 60% is a terrible tax rate.
You scumbag, you bastard.
I
I can't
know.
believe you lied to the people.
I did. It was horrifying.
Yeah, well, I think it's this is the common to sort of circle back to the raid meta. This is the common argument that you hear, which is that it's the only catch up mechanic, which is unfortunately true. But my thought process with this is the issue isn't that noobs can't catch up; it's that whales have gotten too far ahead, and that is because of the raid meta. This is the thing I think people don't understand: is whole economic meta has shifted because of the raid meta. It used to be that major alliances, anyone who wanted to mass recruit, which all of the big political players did that. They would have to invest money downwards. They'd have to redistribute a portion of their funds from their highest people to their lowest people to make those people grow, so that they could stay competitive with all the other alliances. That was the meta. Then raid meta comes along, and now big alliances don't need to invest in small players with their own money because small players can get their own money from raiding. And so what's happened is now money trickles upwards, and this has created an arms race where all the major alliances are building higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, and it's actually widened the gap between the noobs and the big people. So it's had the exact opposite effect that everyone thinks it's had. It's not been a catch-up mechanic, it's been a escalation of the arms race. Because the thing is, like, I quit the game. I've been back for a year and a half, I want to say, and I quit the game for about 2 years, and so it's been 3.5 years or so since I quit the game first. And back then the city count was so much smaller. Like, back then, and it's escalated so fast, and it's only like if you look at the conflicts in globals, this is a great way to conceptualize this. If you look at the globals, the last global war that we just fought, which was not the whole game, it was just it was just, I want to say maybe 40% of the game, maybe fought in that war, and the total damage of that war was almost 2 trillion. Compare that to just like a war from, let's see, um, the last war that I fought in before I quit was Duck Hunt. Let me see if we can find that on here. And
I think Duck
yeah,
Hunt
Duck
wasn't
Hunt
even 1 trillion,
was
maybe.
it didn't even hit 1 trillion. And so like the wealth of the game in particular has escalated to such a degree now that it's snowballing. It's going to get worse and worse, and this is another one of the things that needs to be fixed. Retention is the number one thing because we need more players. Because if you get more players in the low tier will become more important, and the meta will shift downwards a bit. Because as much as people talk about whales, the reality is economically the most important part of your alliance is where the most people are. Because you like if it's all well and good if you fight someone and you have a stalemate and you win the upper tier, but if your whole 1 to 30 gets completely smacked, yeah, you might have quote unquote won the war, but you've taken huge economic penalties. So the more noobs we bring into the game, the more the meta will start to shift downwards a little bit.
I think I have a Google sheet
And
that
the
shows this.
second biggest issue after retention is the just escalating insane levels of growth that are happening. And like I mean, I'll track the like monthly growth of every alliance, and it was not that long ago, last year or something. I remember we broke the record for the most growth in a single month at that point that had ever been. Now, major alliances do that every month. Like that's how quickly it's gone from like that was a record breaking amount to this is just the normal. And the thing is, like I was talking earlier about like our war stats and like it was mostly jokingly like our net damage and things. The thing is that is going to be eclipsed in like 1 or 2 wars from now. Like someone's going to outperform that. And it won't even necessarily be because they perform better. It'll be because the alliances are bigger, the wealth is more. And so, like, even like, this is the first period where we've gone high infra. We've always had higher infra on some of our bigger nations, but this is our biggest infra period that we've had. And the ROI on it's going to be pretty easy to get. And that's just it's going to continue to escalate. So like there needs to be hard limits and more mechanics to fix this. There needs to be a city cap. I mean, there should have been city cap years ago. I said to Cheapy years, Alex, I guess that's what people call him now, years ago, that he needs to put a cap in, and he didn't. And now you have people at D61, and that's insane. And I know that they're outliers. Most people aren't even close to C61. They're in the 50s, but they even still there should have been a cap at 40 or at 50. Now we're at 61, which means in order to put a cap on 60, we'd have to delete that extra city. Which I'm gonna be honest, sorry to the guy with 61 cities.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. Right now, I'd go okay. D60 is the cap. Delete that city. You get your money back. Spend it on something else. But then, of course, the other problem you have is what do you spend it on? There's no other economic alternatives on that.
He would need to seriously and fundamentally rebalance how cities work.
Yeah. Well, the issue is this game doesn't have ways to build tall. Sorry. The only way you can build tall in this game is land and food. That's the only way. every other mechanic in the game is designed to be wide, and that is also how the military scales. And so we've had this issue where like military and economics are directly tied to each other. There's some talk in the design team about adding new economic options for military, which I think is a good thing. But we also need new economic options for just economic options, like for economy. We need more ways to build our nations in and ways to, I guess, it's hard to concept because the issue, this is the problem. People always complain whenever economic change comes through because it benefits whales. But every change benefits whales. What you need to be looking at isn't, is it going to be easier for a whale to make money off this? It's, is it going to be relatively easier for a whale to make money off this than a new player? And like the new commerce changes are a great example. The new commerce changes will help whales. They'll make more cash, but now smaller nations can viably build ITC and Telesat and actually make profit off those projects. The issue with those projects is the profit per slot for a supermarket
I
was crap. It was
I thought Telesat was still useless.
pretty much. You have to have really high infra and an old CDH. Otherwise, Telesat's pretty. It's again, it depends on the market. When the market's deflated, it's good. When it's inflated, it's better. Worse, sorry. But yeah, again, it was pretty crap. Like it's not a good product. Now it's viable, and it's viable for lower city counts, and that's what's important. So now, but of course, that requires alliances to adapt to the meta and actually build those people ITCs and Telesats. So we'll see if that happens. I mean, we've started buying ITCs for people much lower in the project order since those changes happened because now it's more viable to actually run an ITC.
We actually started doing it back in June or May or something. And the logic at the time, I think, was we were running 2,250 infra. And we thought at some point we'd be able to go to 2,500. And that it was just sort of easier to do it now.
Yeah, well, that's always the best. You plan for the future. I mean, like this, like after this war, people don't usually do this, but we're very we intentionally buy things in the sort of peace period at certain times for efficiency. So we bought a bunch of projects. We bought like 270 projects in like 2 days right after the war ended, and we reset like a bunch of project timers. Like we spent a huge amount of money on credits to buy the credits, to reset the project timers, to buy the projects. And like economically, that sounds like a bad choice, but these projects will ROI over time very well. And so we put a lot of focus in that. And then now we're buying cities, and like we buy cities for the low tier first, and then we do the mid tier. It depends on timers too. Like you've got nothing, if you've got money to spend and people are on timers, then you start to buy the bigger people cities earlier. But we generally break it up so that we buy smaller cities first, then medium, then large, and that's kind of how we structure it.
I don't know how you managed to do it with credits. I was talking to Abaddon about that and trying to figure out, because to reset every city in Singularity, or every nation in Singularity would take like 600 credits.
Yeah, we don't do cities, only projects, because projects are 1 credit, which is affordable. Cities are actually, this is a good tangent to go on. Actually, they need to change the city cost of the city timer to 1 project, 1 credit. Sorry, I think they need to do that. It's useless otherwise. Because the use case for a city timer reset right now is basically an idiot buys it. That's the only use case. Which you could make an argument for that in general, but you need at least some ROI. The thing is, cities have 2 purposes. They have ROI and then they have military. And so there's definitely a good reason to buy city resets for military purposes, but not if they're 200 mil pop. There's just no reason to do it. A nation that's large enough to afford that is going to just wait the 10 days, and they're not going to have enough money to buy 2 cities. So, like, the use case is basically some guy gets like a massive windfall, like he steals a bank or he loots a bank or something, makes enough money that he can buy C51. and C52 somehow, and then he resets his shit because 200 mil is like pennies. But even then, the ROI is going to be terrible because you've just bought two super expensive cities. So it's like not even.
Actually, that would be wild though if someone stole a bank and then did 20 credit resets back to back.
Yeah,
So
yeah, well,
city
exactly. Like
20 to 40.
that's like the only use case I can think of because for noobs, like I'm not going to reset noob timers on 200 mil a pop. That's ridiculous. Like that's so much money. Like and it's just like good luck convincing Alex because I know his mindset is more credits, more money, but I don't think that's true. I think he would get more. Sorry, it's 3, not 4, so it's 150
I mean,
million.
I would buy cities in bulk using credits if he did that shit.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Well, I messaged him a while back and I said you should add credits to the banks because, like, if we could store, because the thing is, the way we do credits now, initially what I used to do is I would buy them and trade them to people, but that's super tedious. So now what I do is I just send them the money they need and tell them to go buy it off the market. But if I could just stockpile credits in the bank and then send them out to people, that'd be so much simpler, and it would drive the market up more because at least temporarily, because you'd have a bunch of alliances will go, oh shit, okay, I can store credits now. I'm going to
I think
buy a
the
bunch of credits
reason
off the market.
it's short term though, because I think the reason he doesn't want it is because Rose or something would hoard like 3,000 credits. Like Syndicate's bank is
Well, that's
1
good for
trillion.
him.
So
That's good for him though. Like financially, it makes sense because then the prices of the credits go up, monetary value, and that incentivizes more people to buy more credits. So I don't think that's inherently a bad thing for him, which is what he cares about more than anything, I think. But yeah, I
maybe.
don't know.
I know there's some strangeness though with the 1,000 credit nations. Like I remember Syndicate, they put 800 on Luffy, and there's a goon guy who's an EVH. He had at one point about 800 credits, and there's like a handful of
Yeah.
others.
There's people. I think there was one guy in our alliance. I can't even remember who it was. I was talking to him one time, and I was about to send him to buy credits, and he was like, "Oh, I have." I think he said 80 or something,
Yeah,
which to me, even to me, 80 is like what? Like that's
yeah.
way more than you need on your nation. So like, yeah, I say. But the thing is, there's no downside to people hoarding credits for Sheepy's bottom line, or really for anyone else. Like it doesn't matter. They're not a resource that needs to be managed in the economy as much. I don't think because he can set the value of credits by changing the base rate, which I think increasing the base rate without changing the costs has created a problem because the issue with like the city timers is it doesn't matter that the game is inflated because the ROI doesn't change on resetting a city. All right, like if I reset a city, it still has to make me, if not more money, which that'd be difficult, but it still has to make me enough money for me to want to not wait 10 days to buy the city. Right, you need to get at least a little bit bump of income. I think an average like whale, like a big city makes like a mil a day, right?
Mm. Yeah.
The average. This time, I think mine made like 1.5 or something, but let's say a mil a day, right? You so if a credit is 10 mil, or if the cost of the city reset, sorry, is 10 mil, then that's an ROI. Obviously, it wouldn't be that low. You still have to probably make it more expensive than the benefit. Because otherwise, everyone would just do it all the time. There's been no reason not to, and you would have a huge escalation in the game's growth. Um, but the cost right now is 150 million. So you get 10 days of extra income at a mil a pop. So you get about 10 mil, let's say, and it costs you 150 mil. So you're losing 140 million basically every time you do it. So it's not worth it. So if you reduced it to even one, I think one would be good. That's 50 mil. There was 40 mil on it. It'd be worth it in certain circumstances to reset credits. But will he do that? No, I don't know. Maybe you can get him listen to this and he'll listen and hear the arguments and do it. Or probably not.
I mean, it would actually be pretty good for balance and stuff as well. So combining a few topics we've been talking about, I've been looking at the lower tier recently, and a lot of alliances are stagnating at about City 20. And those that aren't stagnating there are getting to about City 23, 25, and that's where they're really finding it difficult. They're in a peace period right now. They're in a lull between.
That's because of the planning project is what causes that.
Yeah.
This is why, like the latest change fixed planning projects, but the concept of planning projects was always a bad concept, and they never really should have been added to the game. This is I have been very critical Pre's run as design team lead because I think a lot of the things that he added just threw the game out of balance, and it felt like they were just like. It felt like they just blindfolded themselves, spun around, and threw shit at a wall to decide the prices of a lot of the projects and stuff that they did. Makes no sense. So the problem with the city planning projects is, like, yeah, sure, now they ROI. They didn't before. Before that, the ROI on them was so bad. Like, I mean, they did ROI, but it took too long. It took like I think the MP it was like 7 cities, and for AUP it was like sometimes it was 6 and sometimes it was 8. It was worse in a lot of cases. And then urban was like 5. Problem is, that's a huge roadblock that you have to get through to get past that part of the game because you have to spend like, I think collectively they're worth like 1.1 billion or something. They're less now.
The way I phrased it, and because I think I was the only one that was pushing for discounts on them. Pretty much all of the established alliances were for the prices and even increasing them for like stuff like Metropolitan. But the problem was that essentially it rewarded established wealth. So Rose could, for instance, if you're a new player, you're joining the game, you could get 150 mil discount on every city just by virtue of joining Rose or another top 5 alliance, or you could join the rest. And that was how the projects were allocated. The top 5 had them all. No one else had any of them. Even top 10 alliances didn't have them. That's how bad they were. And
yeah, well, that is very correct. And that was when they first came out and they made the announcement, I went on and I said, these are too expensive. They're shit. And that's the truth. The truth is the actual mistake that a lot of those alliances made was buying them in the first place. The best actual strategy, now you can buy them because they literally ROI within the period that you would be growing.
I
so
disagree.
They're worth it now.
I think a lot of alliances that could buy them should have bought them. But the problem was it was only a very small handful that could. And they profited massively.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think the best strategy back then for the small alliances and stuff was to start to buy them later in the cycle, not to buy them when you could, but buy them later because you're better off growing through that cycle and losing out. But the people like they have this mindset of like, I'm losing out on money. You're not. You are, but you aren't. You're losing out on income that you would have got if you just bought the city straight up. You're better off. Different sizes in income can only support certain costs, and those costs were way too high for the incomes that they had, so they were stalling a bunch of lower tier nations at those points. And it's not good. It's not. It was horrible. It was one of the worst updates to the game in terms of slowing down the upper tier, and this is why I hated the previous one. I thought a lot of the stuff we had was terrible.
Yeah.
And it is what it is now. I think there have been